If there are no more questions, we will move to the next business. Question for short debate. Mandatory ethnicity pay gap reporting. Lord Boating.
My Lords, I rise to ask the question standing in my name on the order paper. My Lords, the case for minority ethnic pay gap reporting is not only a profoundly moral one, it is also intensely practical. My Lords, every person, regardless of their ethnicity or background, should be able to fulfill their potential at work. That is the business case as well as the moral case. And diverse organizations that attract and develop individuals from the widest pool of talent consistently perform better. My Lords, those are not my words. I adopt them, but they are the words of the Chartered Institute of Personnel and Development. And they ring true. The government's own review into race in the workplace that was conducted by Baroness McGregor-Smith estimates that having full representation of ethnic minority workers in the labour market would both help reduce poverty across the country significantly and benefit the UK economy to the tune of about £24 billion a year. That's about 1.3%, my Lords, of GDP. The reality is that poverty is a fact of life for all too many in the black and ethnic minority communities. Compared to white groups, BAME groups experience a poverty rate that is twice as high as that of their white counterparts. Research indicates that poverty rates are about 50% of Bangladeshi groups, 47% for Pakistani groups, 40% for black groups, 35% for Chinese groups, and 25% for Indian groups, compared with 20% for white groups in the UK. So the poverty is real. The challenge to British industry to improve their productivity, the challenge to grow our economy in a post-COVID world is also all too apparent. Hence the need for the government to act now on this particular issue, because they consulted on the ethnic minority pay gap as long ago as October 2018. They closed that consultation in 2019, and yet no response has ever been published. That is really inexplicable, given the degree of public concern there is about this issue. Diana Grayson is to be congratulated for her campaign, which produced over 130,000 signatures. It was that led to the debate on the issue in the Commons, in the other place. The Office of National Statistics has demonstrated only too clearly the need for the better collection of data. In addition to that, we now have the Confederation of British Industry, the Trade Union Congress, and the Equalities and Human Rights Commission all making the case for better data and for mandatory reporting in this area. And the reason why they do that is that if we are to successfully address the challenges of diversity in the workplace and the damage it does to our economy by not securing the proper and fair and equitable promotion and retention of black and ethnic minority workers and decent and fair reward, if we don't do that, then the price to pay is all too high. And the challenge for the government is to come up with a response to the questions raised. It really isn't good enough to put this in the all too difficult box. Yes, we know there are challenges. Yes, we know there are trade-offs to be made in terms of obtaining data that takes this issue forward. But we know, because the advances that have resulted as a result of the collection of data on gender have demonstrated, we know that where we do have data, then the transparency, the light of publicity that is thrown on glaring disadvantage and disparity changes the situation on the ground. And it gives hope to those who are currently prevented from realizing their full potential. But also, and importantly, what it does is to recognize that out there in the wide world, it's already beginning to happen. There are some really good examples of best practice amongst employers, working with their trade unions, working with statisticians qualified to assist them in obtaining data that's really making a difference, and linking that data to a narrative that demonstrates what the company is actually doing in order to improve the situation, and linking it too with an effective strategy and policy to get them to a better place. Good examples are there. Network Rail is a very good example. John Lewis. There are other employers who are showing the way. But what all employers are asking for is better guidance. What all employers are saying is, look, we want to produce data, but we need to be sure that we're all producing data on the same basis, and we want to know that the government is on our side, is supporting what we are doing. So the silence on the part of the government is deafening, but it's also quite inexplicable when you look at what it is that their own reviews are demonstrating. It's inexplicable too in terms of an agenda that's about levelling up, that's about improving everyone's opportunities. And this is a UK-wide problem. If you take the figures for Humberside, the ethnicity pay gap there is something like 12.7%. In London, it's worse, far worse actually, it's 23.8%. It's 10.3% in Scotland, and the good news about Scotland is that their government is now actively promoting and supporting the collection of this data. So the question for the government is to respond to the legitimate points made by the Trade Union Congress, the CBI, and the Equalities and Human Rights Commission. When they asked for mandatory reporting, they asked that the government seek to build on the success of gender reporting. They make the point that reporting done well can provide a real foundation to better understand and address the factors contributing to pay disparities. You know, the government has been asked, and still no response, to support further work on this by the CBI, by the trade unions, by the Equalities and Human Rights Commission. Professional statisticians have come forward with advice and expertise on this. The ONS wants to see progress made in terms of making sure that its own data better contributes to the resolution of these issues. So the question for the government is, will you now set a clear time frame to implement this? Will you work with interested parties to develop the tools and resources required by industry to ensure that employers are supported and that workers are confident in disclosing data in advance of making reporting mandatory? Because this can be an incremental thing. It doesn't have to be done overnight. It doesn't have to involve all employers employing more than 250 people at once. It can be done incrementally. The government has, from its own review, the answer to these issues. The government has, from within it, a capacity to respond to the challenge laid down by all people of goodwill on all sides of the House and in both houses for this action to be taken. The time for talking is over. Now is the time to act. That was the title of the government's own review. Time to act.
I am grateful to the noble Lord, the Lord Boateng, for raising this question for short debate. And I know from my own experience as Dean of York formerly, the significant positive impact gender pay gap reporting had on the implementation of policies of inclusion in an institution which had previously been overwhelmingly male. Careful attention to the gender pay gap required us to focus continuously on developing opportunities for women, not least in our stone yard amongst carpenters and stonemasons, where we achieved parity. We had equal opportunity for girl and boy choristers. I admit, though, that the back row of the choir presented more of a challenge. Now, in the Diocese of Bristol, I am acutely aware both of the imbalance in the number of UKME lay employees and their recruitment largely to junior roles in my organisation. Totally different from the surrounding population, to my shame. I would hope that the Church of England might consider participating in a pilot study in preparation for this policy, as I do understand that the law in this area is complex. There are challenges in drafting legislation or guidance and in the collection of data. I note these and I offer 3 suggestions for a way forward. There is obviously not currently a legal requirement for companies to collect, share or publish ethnicity pay gap data. I hope this can be changed, and an illustrative precedent here is the 2016 Higher Education White Paper, proposal to place a duty on institutions to publish application offer acceptance and progression rates broken down by gender, ethnicity and disadvantage, and legislate to require those organisations who provide shared central admissions services to share relevant data they hold with government and researchers in order to help improve policies designed to increase social mobility. These proposals were enacted in the subsequent Higher Education and Research Act of 2017. GDPR rules, secondly, require that individual consent to the collection and storage of their personal data and to its use for statistical analysis and other purposes by named organisations must exist. Employers already do collect data relating to other personal characteristics of employees, and so it should not be impossible also to collect ethnicity data within the GDPR rules. And thirdly, and finally, where the total number of employees or the number of employees in a particular subcategory, for example, those of a particular ethnic group, is small, there is a risk that individuals and their personal data could be identified in published statistics. For example, if an employer has just 5 ethnic minority employees, then public reporting of the ethnic majority versus ethnic minority pay gap for this employer could inadvertently reveal the personal pay levels of those 5 ethnic minority employees. There are industry standard methods of minimizing the risk of inadvertently publishing data in which individuals and their personal data are identified, which typically involves suppressing the publication of any statistics relating to fewer than 10 cases. In line with this, provisions could be made to ensure that employers do not publish data relating to subcategories of employees in which there are fewer than 10 cases. However, employers could still be required to collect such data regardless of subcategory size, publish it in a higher aggregated form so that no subcategory has fewer than 10 cases, and share their data with a trusted third party such as the ONS, who could analyse data provided by all employers and report results in a way that safeguards against disclosure of personal data or identities. Given these mitigations, I do therefore support the requirement for larger enterprises to collect and publish data on ethnic pay gap in order to bring about much greater equality of opportunity in the workplace and a greater sense of common humanity.
Ethnic Minority President of the Confederation of British Institutes, CBI, and from the outset I wanted to find a way to champion ethnic minority participation across all business, and I congratulate and thank the Noble Lord Boateng for initiating this debate at this crucial time. I'm proud to say that in the midst of a pandemic, the CBI launched Change the Race Ratio a year ago in October 2020, and this is to accelerate racial ethnic diversity in business across the board. Our founding partners included Aviva, Brunswick, Deloitte, EY, Linklaters, Microsoft, Russell Reynolds, Schroders, the Investment Association, Unilever, Business of the Community, 30% Club, City Mental Health Alliance, and Cranfield Business School. And it's open to all business and institutions, large or small, and aimed at creating change in the business community. I'm proud to say, a year later, we've got 100 leading organisations from BP to Diageo to Odgers to Glasgow University that sign up to 4 things. One is to champion the Parker Review. The Parker Review, now 2016-17, today, 1 ethnic minority director on every FTSE 100 board, 1 ethnic minority director on every FTSE 250 board, 100 by the end of 2021, 250 by the end of 2024. Sadly, today, there are almost 20 FTSE 100 companies that do not have a single ethnic minority director. And when it comes to FTSE 250, 54 companies had 1 ethnic minority director. So we have a long way to go. And in fact, research completed by campaign signatory Green Park, chaired by Trevor Phillips, revealed that there are no black chairs, CEOs or CFOs in the FTSE 100. So we need to make a step change. The second thing that organisations sign up to is to increase racial and ethnic diversity in senior leadership. The third thing is to be transparent on targets and actions, and specifically to disclose ethnicity pay gaps by 2022 at the latest. And the fourth thing that organisations sign up to change the race ratio is to create an inclusive culture in which talent from all diversities can thrive. And I remember a Harvard Business Review article titled, "Diversity Without Inclusion is Useless." And my lords, I've seen this firsthand from my own business, Cobra Beer, which I started with just 2 of us, and we built a mini United Nations, people from all over the world, from different backgrounds, different mindsets, different cultures. And that combination created a buzz, and that buzz created innovation, and that innovation created growth. And I'm so proud of it. At the CBI, we have just launched our economic vision for the UK for the next decade called Seize the Moment. And within that is creating an inclusive economy. And the Noble Lord Boateng quoted our noble colleague Ruby McGregor-Smith's review, which said, improving participation would create an extra 24 billion to the economy. I think that's a huge underestimate. It would be far, far greater. And many companies are actually leading the way. Eversheds, for example, set a public target to reach 10% ethnic minority UK partners by 2025. Google has set a target to support black executives and achieve at least a 30% minority representation on the executive team by 2025. And we've learned from the experience with gender, the Hampton-Alexander Review specifically, and gender pay gap reporting, that change doesn't happen overnight. But gender pay gap reporting is now mandatory. What gets measured gets done. And my lords, McKinsey data in 2019 shows very clearly the top quartile of companies that embrace diversity and inclusion are 36% more profitable than the bottom quartile. Deloitte has conducted surveys that show that D&I embracing companies are more innovative. The ethnicity pay gap, my lords, in many companies is over 25%. This pay gap should not exist. It is unacceptable. At the CBI, we report our own ethnicity pay gap, and our Director General, Tony Danker, this year's report said we have a long way to go to eliminate institutional and systemic barriers in our workplace, It is in this spirit that we're committed to reporting our ethnicity pay gap on a voluntary basis. Like our members, we want to do all we can to create a fair and inclusive workplace where everyone can thrive. And my lords, I conclude with this. Building diverse and inclusive workplaces is not only the right thing to do, but it also has a strong business case behind it. Diversity increases employee satisfaction, helps to retain existing and attracts new staff, reduces recruitment costs, increases productivity, helps companies to better represent the communities they serve. Will the government agree that we should make ethnicity pay gap reporting mandatory? What gets measured gets done.
My Lords, I thank the noble Lord Boateng for this much-needed debate and fully support his call for mandatory reporting. Ethnicity pay gap reflects sedimented residues of colonialism and worker exploitation and must be eradicated. Disclosures are vital in giving visibility to unacceptable practices and pave the way for reforms. Well-managed businesses already have the relevant information, so the cost of disclosure is negligible. In any case, it would be a minuscule proportion of the amounts that these entities spend on public relations campaigns. Mandatory reporting of ethnicity pay gap and investigation of the related lack of diversity should be extended to professions, universities and other large entities. Only 140 of the UK's 21,000 university professors are black. Only 6 of 800 partners of the UK Magic Circle law firms are black. FTSE 100, as has already been said, have 0 senior black executives at the board level. In 1987, accountancy profession was the subject of a Commission for Racial Equality probe into racism in the recruitment process. It published a document titled Chartered Accountancy Training Contracts, Report of a Formal Investigation into Ethnic Minority Recruitment. It promised to revisit the issue, but never did. Its successor bodies have not done so either. While some accountancy firms have voluntarily disclosed ethnicity pay gap data, progress towards eradication of the ethnicity pay gap is slow. Most recently, black staff at PricewaterhouseCoopers are reported to be paid 41% less than white colleagues. Ernst & Young have ethnicity pay gap of 36.7%. There is a lack of diversity in big accounting firms. Last year, there were only 17 black partners amongst the top 8 accountancy firms. Only 11 of the big 4 accounting firms, 3,000 partners, are black. Deloitte has 1, Ernst & Young and KPMG 2 each, and PricewaterhouseCoopers only 6. A July 2021 report by the Financial Reporting Council showed that disabled and LGBTQ+ citizens have virtually no chance of reaching a senior position in major accounting firms. Would the Minister please bring legislation to achieve the following 6 objectives? First one, mandatory ethnicity pay gap reporting. Second, directors to provide binding plans to reduce the ethnicity pay gap and increase diversity. 3, increased diversity and reduction of ethnicity pay gap must form part of executive remuneration contracts. 4th, this data must be audited by trade unions and works councils, not by accounting firms who can't actually be trusted to deliver any honest audit. 5th, the government has possible sanctions. It must refuse to give any public contracts to entities not reducing ethnicity pay gap. 6th, the government must produce an annual report explaining how its policies are addressing issues about the ethnicity pay gap. I look forward to hearing the Minister's detailed reply to these 6 suggestions.
My Lords, I'm grateful to Lord Boateng for initiating this debate and for making such a powerful argument for what is potentially a game-changing enabler for ethnic minorities' participation in the economic reward system of this country. Before I commence my remarks, I should declare an interest as Chair of the Equality and Human Rights Commission, one of the signatories of the call for government to bring in mandatory ethnic pay gap reporting in the workplace. Now, the House will know that at EHRC we enforce the gender pay gap regulations and may well be the body charged with enforcement of a putative EPG. Our experience of GPG is that the transparency that this collation of data has brought to employers is, they tell us, incredibly valuable. In the few short years we've been doing this, because we only started in 2017, we've seen the pay gap narrowed from 17.4% in 2019 to 15.5% by 2020. Alas, I fear the result of the pandemic will make it, for a short period, increase, but nevertheless, we're on that case. Our research into ethnic pay inequalities showed that there were multiple and complex factors at work here. This includes occupational segregation for women and carers particularly, a lack of flexible working, and a serious lack of senior level representation. Additionally, we also found, after looking at the markers you'd expect to see, there were large gaps of the ethnicity pay data that were inexplicable to us. This suggests that there's a level of discrimination still in the economy and workplaces in this country. Now, we recognize that measuring ethnic minorities' pay gaps are much more complex than for gender. We know that they vary by ethnic group, by sex, age, and whether individuals are UK or foreign born. And it isn't simply the case that white British people earn more. The most recent statistics available show that while the majority of ethnic minorities earn less than their white British counterparts, Chinese, white, Irish, Indian, and Asian and Indian ethnic groups all had higher hourly pay. So it isn't going to be a simple white versus others equation. There are also stark regional variations, reflecting in part the different levels of diversity in parts of Britain. The ethnicity pay gap, which is the difference between ethnic minority and white British workers, was 2.3% overall in 2019 and 20, but stood at 23.8% in London, as Lord Bertram said, and only 1.5% in Wales. So if we are the monitoring body for this, if it comes about, I can reassure Cumbria and Hill farmers we won't be coming for them. Moreover, we appreciate that a binary reporting requirement, similar to that for gender, would potentially tell us relatively little about the particular barriers facing individuals or certain ethnic minorities, or indeed suggest for employers what responses are needed. And I very much support Lord Berting's call for a narrative alongside the reporting, because that's the explanatory part, that's the analysis that gets us to where we need to get to. We welcome the government's consultation to extend mandatory ethnicity pay gap reporting in line with existing gender pay gap reporting and await the outcome, but we feel that it is important that there is a nuanced approach in this, and that tracking outcomes at key stages in the employment journey, recruitment, retention, and progression offer much greater insight into the specific barriers facing groups. It's also essential to ensure that any future reporting mechanism has large enough employee sizes to ensure the right to anonymity is preserved. So in conclusion, if the government and large businesses are serious about ending race discrimination, then this is the most effective way to make a real difference to the lives of ethnic minorities in this country. And I look forward to the Minister's response.
My Lords, I thank the Noble Lord Boateng for securing this short but very important debate. And Lord Boateng spelt out very clearly both the moral and the practical case for gender pay gap reporting. And it's a pleasure to follow Baroness Faulkner, and I agree with all that she's said, and I think the experience she has shows the importance of pay gap reporting. The Commission on Race and Ethnic Disparities, which the government set up, did not recommend statutory reporting of the kind in place since 2017 for gender pay. My question is, do the government accept their recommendation and the rationale advanced by them for not making ethnicity pay gap reporting mandatory? And as we already heard, Following the publication of this report, CBI, TUC, and of course the EHRC, among others, urged the government to introduce mandatory ethnicity pay reporting. And companies calculating their ethnicity pay gap voluntarily is growing. For example, Business in the Community found that 1 in 10 large company reports on its ethnicity pay gap voluntarily. So as we heard earlier, there are good examples of how this can be done. And those who are reluctant to report have advanced practical difficulties in gathering this data as a reason for not making pay gap reporting mandatory. My Lord's, examination of these arguments shows that practical difficulties can be overcome, and we must not make best the enemy of the good. Arguments about complexity are not a convincing reason for not making pay gap reporting mandatory. Furthermore, the pay gap reporting is not intended as a perfect statistical tool, but a helpful snapshot as a guide for further probing and consequent action. As others have said, it is not a silver bullet, but one other important tool to assist action of promoting equality of opportunity. Benefits of gathering and publishing this data with expanding narrative are many. It prompts companies to examine and have conversations about what is happening in their organizations and take appropriate action. It catalyzes action. And as Lord Boateng said, the government conducted a consultation on the pay gap reporting in 2018-19. Can the Noble Lord the Minister please tell the House when will the government publish the results of this consultation and the response to the report on the Race Disparity Commission? Because action is needed. We cannot wait any longer.
The Noble Lady Baroness Prashar, but let me first congratulate my noble friend on securing this debate and congratulate him in particular on his speech, which made an unanswerable case for ethnicity pay gap reporting. Fairness in relation to pay is a key issue for all workers, which is why the TUC was always in favour of gender pay gap reporting, and why now the TUC, joined by the CBI and the Equality and Human Rights Commission, is in favour of ethnicity pay gap reporting. In the context of the rise of the Black Lives Matter movement, calls have clearly intensified for race equality and, as has been said, a petition to introduce mandatory ethnicity pay gap reporting was delivered to Her Majesty's Government last July. This followed, of course, the McGregor-Smith review of race in the workplace already referenced. And that, as my noble friend said, is emblazoned with the slogan, "The time for talking is over, the time to act is now." But the government didn't act on the recommendations that it should legislate to make larger businesses publish their ethnicity data by salary band to show progress. As is frequently the case, the government consulted and found difficulties. And the results of this consultation have not, in fact, been published. But one of the difficulties put forward, as I understand it, is the issue of sample size and workplace segregation. However, Professor Susan Milner of the University of Bath says, and I quote, "Pay gap reporting in its current form, and bear in mind that 11% of companies do produce data, is not meant to be a robust statistical tool. It provides a snapshot of workforce composition and pay at any given point. The point, my lords, of pay gap reporting is to oblige employers to examine their data and work out what disparities might exist. This, my lords, is why the National Education Union conducts a survey of pay, and whilst it does not specifically conclude that discrimination is taking place, it does provide figures which the employers of teachers should perhaps consider. It's the largest database of teacher pay data, given that the DfE doesn't collect meaningful data on this basis. Headlines from that survey, that recent survey, include that 85% not enough in my view, but 85% of white British teachers had received the National Recommended Cost of Living Award, but even worse and appallingly, only 77% of other ethnic minority teachers had received it. In terms of pay progression, only 7% of white British teachers were denied pay progression, but 11% of other ethnic origin teachers were so denied. And in fact, in the finer detail, 15% of Indian teachers and 14% of African teachers, as self-identified in the survey, had not received this pay progression. At the very least, these figures suggest a requirement to publish a policy on pay progression at school level in every single school. I will close my remarks by returning to Professor Susan Milner, because she concludes that the ethnicity payback reporting will provide an imperfect picture, but still a much-needed one that organisations can learn from in order to improve their employment practice, and at a time when there is evidence of worsening employment conditions for people from black and ethnic minority backgrounds due to the pandemic, government action is more necessary than ever. I believe she's right, my lords. I hope the noble Lord the Minister can offer some hope for action.
Yeah. My lords, can I join with other members in congratulating Lord Boateng, my noble friend, for his very well-informed and incredibly powerful contribution and giving all of us the opportunity to make such important contributions. And I think we've all learned an incredible amount from the contributions we've heard this far. And could I also thank my noble friend Lord Seeker for his contribution, and I'm sure I'm not alone in looking forward to the response of the noble Lord the Minister to his request to answers for his 6-point plan. Only last month it was reported that just 13 of the FTSE 100 companies report their ethnicity pay gap. The lesson, as we've heard, learnt from the gender pay gap reporting is that until it is mandatory, it will not become commonplace. Whilst the ethnicity pay gap is usually considered to be around 2 to 3%, if we delve further, we find there are much wider differences between the group, and as we've heard, between groups, and as we've heard, there are many complex reasons for this. And what we know is that, unfortunately, until mandatory reporting is introduced, we will never have a full picture and full understanding of exactly what is happening. But even now, we can shamefully recognise the gap in pay between many different ethnic groups, as the noble lady Baroness Faulkner so eloquently laid before us. We need better data, but most of all, we need action. My noble friend Lord Boateng has so rightly made the case for mandatory reporting, and he is joined, as we've heard, in the good company of the CBI, the TUC, as we've heard from my noble friend Baroness Blower, the Equality and Human Rights Commission, who have all declared their support, a very powerful coming together of different views. There can be no excuse for the government's delay. It is time for the introduction of these new requirements now. But I must say that I think the government must go further than just mandatory ethnicity pay gap reporting. We also need to close the gap with a new requirement on employers to report and eliminate pay gaps. This can begin with the implementation of action plans to eradicate inequalities in the workplace, and must form part of a wider strategy to end the poverty wages and insecure work that blights millions of lives and is holding back our economy. We've heard in the debate the disproportionate impact of the COVID pandemic on ethnic minorities. What we also know is the impact of poverty on children in our communities. I've said before that we know that a quarter of children under the age of 16 living in Leeds are deemed to be living in poverty. 5% of those are living in working households. So what do we actually know about, therefore, the disproportionate impact of children on children from ethnic minorities affected by these? The Right Reverend Prelate Bishop Bristol has very carefully talked about the work on the gender pay cap. And we've heard from the LSE earlier this year that since the legislation came in 2017, there has been progress, but all of us know just how much work there is to do. So what we have in front of us is a real sense, unfortunately, that the government is dragging its feet on this issue, despite the well-documented public concern and the fact that there is good practice evidenced in many areas of the workplace that are doing good work in this area. Practical issues are raised as objections. What we need to do is make sure that the government issues guidance. Can I finish by asking the Noble Lord the Minister, is the government on our side? Are they prepared to go the next steps in making the ethnicity pay gap reporting mandatory?
My Lord, let me first of all thank the Noble Lord, Lord Boateng, for this debate. I'm sure we all agree that it has been both interesting and informative, and I'm grateful to all who have contributed. Firstly, let me make it clear that the government is committed to building back better from the pandemic. And a key part of building a fairer economy is ensuring that our businesses and other organisations reflect the nation's diversity from factory floor to boardroom. We know that some companies face challenges ensuring equal access and fair representation of people from all backgrounds in the workplace. But the picture is complex and outcomes vary substantially between ethnicities and by gender within ethnic groups. In 2016, the government asked Baroness McGregor-Smith to examine the barriers faced by people from ethnic minorities in the workplace and consider what might be done to address them. One of her recommendations was that government should legislate for the mandatory reporting of ethnicity pay data. The government response said that whilst it was persuaded by the case, we expected businesses to take the lead in reporting voluntarily. 1 year on, it was established that some limited progress had been made. Given this outcome, we published a consultation on mandatory ethnicity pay reporting. The consultation responses raised a series of issues. Establishing a standard ethnicity pay reporting framework is considerably more challenging than was the case for gender pay gap reporting. There are genuine difficulties in designing a methodology that provides accurate figures and one that allows for interpretation and meaningful action from employers, employees and the wider public. So we have continued to work with businesses and other organisations to better understand the complexities identified through the consultation. We are also considering the findings of the Commission on Race and Ethnic Disparities, which were published earlier this year. This very good report makes an important contribution to both the national conversation about race and the government's efforts to level up and unite the whole country. In its report, the Commission points to the statistical and data issues that can affect ethnicity pay reporting and proposed a voluntary approach. It further recommends that all employers that choose to publish their ethnicity pay figures should also publish a diagnosis and action plan. This should lay out the reasons for and the strategy to improve any disparities. The Commission further recommended that pay data should be disaggregated by different ethnicities to provide the best information possible to facilitate change and that account should also be taken of small sample sizes in particular regions and small organisations. To support employers undertaking this exercise, the Commission recommended that the Department for Business, Energy and Industrial Strategy is tasked with producing guidance for employers to draw on. We are committed to taking action, but we want to make sure that we are doing the right things that will genuinely help to move things forward. Key to that is determining what it makes sense to report on and what use the data may be put to. The Commission's report and our further work with businesses and other organisations identify a wide range of technical and data challenges that ethnicity pay reporting brings. Firstly, statistical robustness. In 2019, the Royal Statistical Society argued for a minimum sample size per category of at least 100 in order to draw valid conclusions. The purpose of this was to ensure that the calculation of a pay gap statistic would be reasonably reliable when interpreted by a non-statistician. Secondly, anonymity. It should never be possible to identify any individual from ethnicity pay gap analysis. This means a sample size has to be large enough so that it is not possible to link a number of individuals of the same ethnicity to a particular pay band. Thirdly, data collection and the important issue of business burdens. A survey of over 100 organisations by PwC in August 2020 found that almost 35% did not currently collect any ethnicity data, with half identifying legal and GDPR requirements as a barrier to collecting the data. Among those organisations that did collect data, around half said that they were unable to publish their pay data due to poor or insufficient data driven by low response rates. Fourthly, reporting on a binary basis. One way to mitigate low employee declaration rates is to combine all individuals from an ethnic minority background into a single group for reporting purposes. But such an approach risks masking the significant variations in labour market outcomes between groups and therefore the relevance of any action plan. And finally, skewed results. Reporting at a more granular level risks results being skewed by particularly large or small pay values because of low numbers within particular ethnic groups. The uneven geographical distribution of specific ethnic groups complicates the issue further. All of this creates complex challenges when deciding how best to take forward ethnicity pay reporting. The Government is committed to taking steps to help employers to tackle disparities in the workplace. We are now considering what we have learned from ethnicity pay reporting consultation, our further work and the Commission's report in detail, and we will set out our response in due course. Now, picking up some of the points from the debate, Baroness Faulkner, I thought, made some good points on ensuring that any guidance or support to businesses is not bureaucratic and focused on the issues where they most need support. And I do agree with the noble lady that we should focus on some of the drivers, focus our efforts on some of the drivers of the pay gap. Noble Lord Billamoria raised some interesting points of view from the CBI, and I do agree with the Noble Lord on the importance of business being inclusive. The Lord Bishop of Bristol, I thought, made an excellent contribution, and I agree with some of what the Right Reverend Prelate had to say. And there is something of a precedent for requiring organisations to collect, share or publish ethnicity data, and I also agree that it is possible to collect and publish ethnicity data under the GDPR rules. But I would like to return to the point that I made earlier in my speech, that we must be very mindful when developing our approach of the burdens collecting and publishing this data might impose on businesses, and those that are appropriate and will be impactful. The Noble Lord Billamoria and Lord Seeker both mentioned the issue of the Parker Review, which was set up in late 2015 and published its recommendations in October 2017, the main target being to ensure that all FTSE 100 companies have at least one person from an ethnic minority background on their board by the end of 2021, and for the FTSE 250 to do it by 2024. Whilst the review was not formally commissioned by ministers, BEIS does monitor its progress by providing annual statistical updates on FTSE 350 companies. The thing is financially sponsored by EY. Sir John and his steering board have agreed to continue to engage with business leaders to encourage adoption of the recommendations. Picking up the point of the Noble Baroness Lady Blower that I do agree with the Noble Baroness that EPR does provide an imperfect picture of race and ethnicity in work. And this is one of the challenges that we are working through to try to find the right balance between data that is actionable and comparable and, of course, the business burdens. And finally, Lord Boateng said that this is all in the too difficult box, but it is, in fact, a difficult challenge to develop a standard ethnicity pay reporting system. We will announce the way forward in due course, taking account of the range of views, including those of the Commission on Race and Ethnic Disparities, the CIPD, and the CBI, all of whom we are currently talking to about how to support employers best. So let me finish by thanking the Noble Lord and all those who have contributed to the debate today.
Forgive me for